Hello everyone, welcome to next session. In this session we will discuss how Wiremock works at the backend. So let's begin. So we have already discussed a use case, so it's quite similar to the same. So in this case, so this is the client system. So client system can be anything. It can be a web browser, it can be a mobile application, or it can be, suppose you are using any IDE to test your system, right? So in that case, suppose, so this is the client system and this is the API gateway. So API gateway is nothing, as I already told, this is just a single entry point for all the API calls. So suppose your client is making multiple API calls that have different API operations. Suppose we have cards API here, we have transfer API here, so and this is the customer API which we will be discussing. So in that case, API gateway will decide to which API at the backend this call will go to, right? And this is the customer user API. So customer user API we are taking into consideration here because we will be discussing the same in our upcoming sessions also. So customer user or user API is nothing, it just provides the customer's data. Suppose that's a banking application, so in that case it provides the customer data, customer details, the balance customer has, the card details, or the credit card or the loan accounts the customer holds, right? So let's move ahead. So this is the production system. So how it looks like in the test system is, so it looks like this in the test system if we use the Wiremock. So this is the client which will make call to the API gateway. It will make an API call. Suppose the get balance call it will make, right? So here what will happen is this call will now go to the mock customer API which is mocked, and Wiremock, it is mocked in a Wiremock. So how it works at the backend is, we will discuss this part separately in few minutes. So why now there is no role of this customer user API? Why? Because all the transactions which are flowing from here to here are already mocked using Wiremock, right? And when these transactions are mocked, then connection to from API gateway to the real API is no more required. This is only true in case you are mocking the whole API, right? Or you might be using only few of the operations and other operations are not required within that API. And there can be another scenario also where you want few of the mappings that are not available, few of the transaction that are not available to be mocked, and other transaction which are already in production or in the real API you want to use them. So in that case, that is also feasible. Few transactions will go to the real API and few transactions which you want will go to the Wiremock server, right? So that's how it looks like in the mock API in the Wiremock. So within the Wiremock we have mapping. So let's zoom in and see how this works. So this is the whole system. It can be a local host or it can be a remote server. A remote server, it can be a Linux server, it can be a Linux machine, it can be a Windows machine, right? So what happens in the Wiremock server, Wiremock at the backend has HTTP server, which is a Jetty server, that is a open source Java web server. So at backend it runs an HTTP server, alright? So what happens is, so how Wiremock works at the backend is, when Wiremock will receive transaction from the client, right? So here as we discussed earlier, we have API gateway here. So it will receive transaction from the API gateway and it will look into the mapping. So mappings is the most important part in Wiremock, alright? So what mappings have? It has all the recorded request and the response data that will be sent for that particular transaction, right? So once it will receive the transaction, it will check if within its database, within its mappings, that particular transaction is there or not. Suppose we are sending get balance transaction, right? So it will check whether get balance transaction is available in the mappings or not. If yes, If this is available, then it will send the corresponding response data. So it can be a JSON response, if it's a REST API, and it can be a XML response if it's a SOAP web service, right? So that's how this works. So mappings can be mapped in different ways, which we will be discussing in our upcoming advanced session also. And one more important thing is, if you are testing it, suppose for your personal use or for learning purpose, then 99% of the time you will be using local host. You will just start the server, standalone server on the local host by the using the provided standalone jar. But if you are using in your organization, 99% of the time you will be using over the remote machine, because remote machine will keep your server active all the time, and it will be a separate, altogether separate mock server which multiple teams can use, right? So simply what will happen is, at the endpoint, if we have any endpoint of that particular, suppose for the customer API we have a HTTPS endpoint. So what will happen is, in case for the host name, you will just replace the local host with the remote machine IP or the remote machine name to access that. So that's where it differs, right? And one more thing I want to highlight here is, we will be discussing both the local host and remote machine. In case of remote machine, we will be configuring a Windows server on a AWS cloud, right? So let's begin with our other sessions. Thank you.